Lucas woke up to the insistent sound of his phone ringing in the middle of the night. Still groggy, he reached for the device, not even looking at the caller ID, assuming it was a wrong number. But the voice on the other end made him freeze. It was his own voice, distorted, weary, as if it had crossed time and space just to deliver a chilling message. Lucas, listen closely. You have only 24 hours to save everyone you love. Follow the instructions, don't question them, or you'll watch disaster unfold before your eyes. What initially felt like a cruel prank quickly shifted into something darker when Lucas saw that the call had come from his own number. Stranger still, the call log showed a future date. A shiver ran down his spine as he tried to process what he just heard and seen. To his rational mind, none of this made sense. He was a systems engineer, a man of logic and precision, not one prone to fantasies or superstitions. Still lying in bed, Lucas tried to brush it off as a technical glitch, a malfunction he would eventually uncover. But even as he tried to rationalize, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong. He got up, went to the kitchen, and poured himself a glass of water, hoping it would clear his head, but the echo of the words still buzzed in his mind, threatening the peace he held so dear. Before going back to bed, he opened his phone's call history, out of pure curiosity. Sure enough, the call was logged as recent, with the exact time he'd answered. It was as if the phone itself was trying to convince him that it had actually happened. With his mind growing increasingly unsettled, he navigated to his voicemail. Once there, he noticed a strange folder he hadn't seen before, seemingly hidden. Inside, he found a series of audio files with cryptic instructions. Gripped by a mix of unease and curiosity, he clicked on the first file and heard the same voice again, his own, though this time the tone was even darker. Don't try to understand it all at once. Just do as I say, and everything will become clear. This isn't the first attempt, Lucas, and if you fail, it will be the last for all of us. The message ended in heavy silence, and he felt a massive weight settle over him, as if he were standing on the edge of something vast and unknowable. Lucas tried calming his mind by rationalizing what might be happening. Maybe someone had hacked his phone, recorded those messages, and it was all part of some elaborate scheme to manipulate him. But the more he tried to convince himself of this explanation, something deeper kept urging him to accept the impossible. The sense of strangeness began spiraling out of control, leaving him caught between the urge to ignore it all and the need to understand. Finally, he decided the only way forward was to keep investigating. He knew a phone hack was possible, but something in him compelled him to dig deeper. Drawn to the mystery despite himself, Lucas began inspecting every detail of the device, searching for clues that might justify the situation. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary, yet the list of files remained there, each one carrying the weight of information he feared to decipher. As the night wore on, he listened to another message. This time, the voice issued a specific command: go to the bridge at the end of the street. There, you'll find something you need to see. To understand. The words were nothing but enigmas, yet the tone was assertive, conveying an urgency that made him question if he should truly ignore the warning. Lucas knew that by choosing to follow it, he would put himself in a situation beyond any logic he could explain. At last, his doubt began giving way to an odd sense of determination. Lucas threw on a jacket, grabbed his phone and car keys, and set off toward the bridge mentioned in the message. It was a cold night, and the dense darkness only amplified the weight of every step he took. When he reached the spot, he found a small electronic device hidden beneath one of the streetlights. He picked it up, examining it closely, and noticed a note attached to a folded piece of paper. Unfolding it, he read, "You're closer to the truth than you think." What could that mean? Lucas felt as if he were trapped in a nightmare he couldn't wake up from. His hands shook as he held the device, and the feeling of being watched was almost tangible. The chilly wind whipped across his face, his heart pounding as though he were on the brink of collapse. But he knew this was only the beginning, and that something much larger was about to reveal itself before him. On the way home, he reflected on what he had just experienced. The cryptic instructions, the impossible call, it all seemed to point to a central truth he couldn't yet grasp. Now, more than ever, he knew he couldn't ignore the warning. The mystery was bigger than he was, and his mind was wrapped in a whirlwind of questions that seemed endless. The next morning, Lucas woke up exhausted, his mind still tangled up in the events of the previous night. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't shake the memory of the strange messages and the device he'd found at the bridge. The instructions kept echoing in his mind, a subtle reminder that time was passing, and he needed to decide what to do next. As he got up and made himself some coffee, a wave of determination started to build. If this was a prank, it was the most elaborate and convincing one he'd ever witnessed. He decided that if he was going to find any peace, he had to keep investigating, at least until he could make sense of what was happening. The first step would be decoding the messages and figuring out who could be behind this elaborate setup. Sitting at the kitchen table, he opened the hidden folder of audio files again. As he listened to a new message, a set of coordinates was mentioned, along with the name of a woman. Look for Claire Fisher. She knows more than anyone. The voice sounded even more authoritative this time, as if instructing him to trust every word without question. Claire Fisher. The name didn't ring a bell, but the way it was mentioned indicated that she played a significant role in all of this. Lucas searched the name online and found that Claire was an investigative journalist known for exposing corruption and taking down powerful figures. She'd worked on several high-profile cases and had a reputation for courage and tenacity. She seemed legitimate, but Lucas couldn't understand what someone like her had to do with his mysterious messages or why he should seek her out. Nevertheless, the instructions were clear, and he was ready to follow each one, however improbable they seemed. He was able to locate an address for an office she used as a contact point and decided to go see her. The drive there felt long, and he found himself glancing in the rearview mirror repeatedly, gripped by an odd paranoia creeping into his thoughts. The sense of being watched clung to him at every turn, and he questioned if he was just being overly cautious. The voice in the message had sparked a genuine fear he couldn't control, something almost instinctive. Upon arriving at Claire's office, he was met by a receptionist who barely looked up when he entered. Lucas explained that he urgently needed to speak to Claire about a personal and confidential matter. The receptionist gave him a skeptical look but, after a few minutes of waiting, finally let him into her office. Claire was standing by a window, looking out at the street, and turned to face him with an expression of curiosity mixed with suspicion. I know this is going to sound strange, but your name came up in some instructions I received, Lucas began, trying to stay calm as he explained. Someone who claims to be me from the future said you could help. The words sounded strange even to him, and Claire's expression shifted from curiosity to a mixture of caution and surprise. For a moment, she seemed to consider the situation, as though she were weighing the truth of it. After a few seconds of silence, Claire sighed and sat down, gesturing for him to do the same. Do you have any idea how you ended up here? She asked, her eyes scrutinizing him. Lucas hesitated, trying to organize his thoughts before responding. He told her about the calls, the encrypted messages, and the device he'd found at the bridge. As he spoke, he noticed that Claire seemed more interested with each detail, as if something in his story had triggered a distant memory. She finally gave a grim smile, as though confronting an unpleasant recollection. You're not the first one to come to me with a story like this, Lucas, she said, her tone dark. For years, I've been receiving strange information, fragments of clues that lead me to believe something bigger is going on, something that involves more than any of us can imagine. Her words gave a new dimension to what Lucas had already thought was unbelievable. This wasn't a prank, it was the tip of a much larger mystery. Claire explained that she'd been investigating a group of powerful people who, according to her findings, had access to information allowing them to manipulate the future. She didn't have conclusive proof but enough evidence to suggest a connection between these people and inexplicable global events. If you're being instructed by a future version of yourself, it means someone or something is guiding your steps to achieve a larger goal, she concluded, looking deeply unsettled. Lucas listened to every word, feeling the weight of this revelation pressing down on him. He was caught in something far beyond his understanding and had no idea where it would lead. Claire warned him to be careful, saying any wrong move could put his life in jeopardy. These people don't play fair, Lucas. If you really want to understand, be ready to uncover truths that could change everything you believe. Her words echoed in his mind as he got up to leave, realizing that the path he was on might lead to a point of no return. Leaving Claire's office, Lucas felt the shift in perspective her words had triggered. He wasn't just investigating anonymous messages, he was stepping into a game of intrigue where he barely understood the rules. But something inside him, a relentless curiosity, an undeniable restlessness, drove him to keep going, to follow every lead and risk whatever it took. Even if it meant diving into a disturbing reality, he knew he couldn't ignore the warnings he'd encountered along the way. Lucas was driving back home, but his mind was far from the roads he was navigating. Claire's words echoed like a dark warning, blurring the line between the reality he knew and a shadowy territory where unseen forces seemed to hold a control he was only beginning to grasp. A network manipulating the future, the thought was surreal, and yet, here he was, driven by messages that seemed to come from a version of himself trying to guide him. Each step made everything more complex, and he knew that once he returned home, he'd have to make hard decisions about what to do next. When he arrived home, he felt a strange discomfort, like the unsettling sensation of being watched, a feeling that intensified with each step he took toward the door. An invisible tension filled the air, as if something or someone was waiting for his next move. He closed the door behind him and took a deep breath, trying to calm his thoughts. His mind was racing, but he knew he had to focus. He decided to go over the audio files and notes again, looking for any details he might have overlooked. He reopened the first audio file, listening to the deep, familiar voice that gave him instructions on what to do. This time, the message seemed less terrifying and more like a precise guide. You need to find proof that this is real, and it's hidden in plain sight, in a place you frequent every day. Something you would never notice unless you knew where to look. The instruction was vague, but now he was on high alert for any detail that might fit. He felt like someone trying to piece together a puzzle, each piece more complex than the last. Compelled by curiosity and the urgency conveyed by that voice, Lucas began searching through his home. He looked inside drawers, searched shelves, examined objects he'd always considered ordinary. He felt ridiculous, but his determination outweighed his doubt. Then something caught his attention. At the back of a drawer in his office, there was a flash drive he didn't recognize. Hesitant, he plugged it into his computer, and it contained just one file, titled The Proof. He opened the file, and immediately, a series of encrypted codes filled the screen. To most people, it would be incomprehensible, but to Lucas, a systems expert, it looked like something he could decode with the right tools. He spent hours analyzing sequences and patterns until he finally unlocked a hidden part of the file. What he found was a detailed monitoring log, with dates and times indicating that he'd been under surveillance for months, maybe even years. The shock of seeing his own life catalogued, as if he were some kind of experiment under constant observation, was overwhelming. There were dates, records of his daily routine, his comings and goings, encounters, even specific moments inside his own home. A wave of anger and disgust swept over him as he realized just how much control someone had been exerting over his life. But beneath the anger, fear settled deep inside him, as he had no idea who or what was behind the surveillance, nor what purpose such close monitoring served. Taking a deep breath, he forced himself to keep investigating. It was clear now that the messages had a brutal logic, like a kind of instruction manual guiding him to uncover, piece by piece, the truth behind his own life. Amidst the chaos, a new notification arrived on his phone. It was from an unknown number, and the message was brief but unsettling. "Congratulations on finding the first proof, Lucas. Proceed to the next location. Don't question it. Don't stop. The message included coordinates, which, when he searched the map, turned out to be an abandoned industrial area on the outskirts of the city. Lucas's heart pounded. It was as if the game were escalating, forcing him to step out of the controlled comfort of his routine and into an environment where anything could happen. But now, with concrete evidence that he was being monitored, he felt that the only way to end the situation was to follow every lead, no matter how dangerous. Arriving at the industrial site, Lucas felt a chill run down his spine as he took in the desolate surroundings. Piles of rusty metal, shattered windows, and an eerie silence made the place feel abandoned yet heavy with mystery. He hesitated, but something inside him urged him forward. He searched the area and found a warehouse with the door slightly ajar. Inside, to his surprise, he found a device similar to the one he had found at the bridge. Next to it was an envelope. Lucas opened it and found another instruction as unsettling as the ones before: "You are closer, but be careful whom you trust." He picked up the device and the envelope, trying to control the fear tightening in his chest. Something told him that from this point on, there was no turning back. The messages and evidence were clear: there were forces trying to guide him, but also trying to scare him. What had started as a series of strange messages had turned into a silent pursuit, a search where he was both the hunter and the hunted. As he drove back home, he felt drained. Adrenaline and fear were eating away at his energy, but the need for answers kept him alert. The game had only just begun, and he barely understood the rules. But one thing was certain: now, with the proof that he was being watched, he knew that his only way out was to keep going, to see just how deep this mystery would take him. Returning home, Lucas felt overwhelmed, as if he were carrying the weight of a secret that wasn't only his. The revelations and warnings that he was being watched had shaken his sense of reality, but with each clue, his determination grew stronger. He needed to understand who was behind this manipulation, even if it meant confronting parts of his own life he'd preferred to ignore. The coordinates, the devices, the messages, all seemed to connect him to something larger, something he was only beginning to comprehend. That night, he slept fitfully, haunted by flashes of blurred images. Faceless figures, unfamiliar places, threatening words spoken in dark tones. He woke up in a cold sweat, feeling as if he had crossed through a nightmare. Claire's words about him not being the first to seek answers troubled him, and he realized he had to unravel that part of the mystery before moving forward. He was still baffled by how much Claire seemed to know, and it pushed him to dig deeper. After a brief search, Lucas found the name of someone who might help: Jonathan Hayes, an old college friend, a data analysis and surveillance technology specialist. If anyone could understand the extent of the control being exercised over him, it was Jonathan. Lucas reached out, and after giving him a brief overview, they arranged to meet that evening. He knew Jonathan was a discreet person, someone who would ask precise questions and help him piece together the disconnected fragments he had. Meeting Jonathan brought Lucas a small sense of calm, as if he were finally on solid ground. He explained the essentials: the messages, the devices, the surveillance. Jonathan listened carefully without interrupting, and then began analyzing the flash drive Lucas had brought with the surveillance records. While he examined it, Jonathan looked up, intrigued, and said, "Lucas, this isn't amateur work. The level of surveillance you're describing requires resources that most regular people don't have access to. We're talking advanced tech here, the kind only corporations or government agencies would possess." The confirmation that something larger was at play made Lucas's heart race. He tried to keep his anxiety under control, but with each detail, the situation felt more and more out of hand. Jonathan continued, mentioning that the information on the flash drive might be just a small sample of the surveillance. There were traces of a system he recognized as part of a specific software used to predict behaviors and actions based on data patterns. It's almost like they know what you'll do before you even think it, Jonathan remarked, with a tone so dark it only made Lucas feel more uneasy. Lucas knew he needed more answers, but Jonathan also warned him to be cautious. If these people are monitoring you with this level of precision, it means whatever they're planning directly involves you, maybe in ways you can't understand yet. My advice? Keep digging, but don't trust anyone without first checking them out, he said, looking Lucas in the eye, as though trying to pass on an important warning. Jonathan's cautionary words struck deep. Lucas knew the investigation was leading him down a dangerous path, but at the same time, he couldn't ignore the messages guiding him. Something within him drove him to continue, to follow every clue, and to risk more with each step. Returning home, he went over his notes and audio files as if he were assembling the pieces of a complex puzzle. But many pieces were missing, and he felt he was only scratching the surface of something far deeper. He decided to review his own records and try to identify patterns in his activities. During his analysis, he noticed that several dates aligned with important moments in his life, specific occasions when he'd made crucial decisions. The connection between these moments and the surveillance was disturbing. He wondered if somehow, his choices had been influenced by this oversight, if he'd truly been free in his decisions or if he'd been manipulated from the start. Amid this reflection, a new message arrived, this time with no familiar voice, but an equally cryptic tone: the truth about who you are and why you're involved is closer than you think. Look for clues in your past. Where it all began, the words were a provocation, a riddle that sent him back to an unknown point in his own history, something he'd never thought to explore. Now his past seemed to hold secrets he hadn't known existed, and it made him question every memory and every step he'd taken up to that moment. Determined, Lucas sifted through old records, revisiting files and documents he'd kept. Among them, he found something that caught his attention: an old photo from his childhood. In the picture, he was in a park, standing next to a man he couldn't identify. There was something familiar yet distant about the image, like a memory hidden deep in his mind. The man in the photo had an intense, almost protective gaze, and Lucas couldn't shake the feeling that this man was crucial to the mystery surrounding him. With his mind racing with questions, Lucas realized that the path to answers would inevitably involve a plunge into his own past. Each new clue took him deeper, and he was beginning to understand that nothing he'd experienced had truly been by chance. Lucas spent the night restless, reflecting on everything he'd uncovered. The old photo, the mysterious man beside him, the messages that kept pulling him deeper into a web of secrets intertwined with his own life. The feeling that he was on the brink of something vast and ominous haunted him like an invisible shadow. He knew he needed to uncover his past to make sense of what was happening in the present. But how could he begin to search for answers to questions he didn't even know how to ask? As he was drinking his coffee, his phone vibrated with a notification that made him jump. It was a new audio message. This time, the voice wasn't just his, it was a darker, more urgent version of his own, carrying a different weight, as if something had shifted dramatically. You've found the first proofs, but this is just the beginning. Your house has been compromised. Now, more is at stake than you realize. Look for the alpha device hidden inside the office wall clock. It holds answers, but it will raise new questions. Prepare yourself. Lucas felt a chill run down his spine. He knew that clock, but he'd never imagined something could be hidden there. The message stirred a strange sense of vulnerability in him, as if every place he considered safe was, in reality, a trap. His own home now felt like enemy territory, each object a potential threat. Even so, he knew he couldn't hesitate. Following the instructions, he went to his office and removed the clock from the wall, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside the compartment, he found a small device, similar to a flash drive but with a sturdier, high-tech look, equipped with what appeared to be an advanced encryption system. It felt as though this device carried a unique energy, something beyond ordinary understanding. Plugging the device into his computer, a series of files opened, revealing what seemed, at first glance, to be chaotic fragments of data. However, as he organized them, a disturbing narrative began to emerge. The files contained a detailed account of Lucas's life, including information no one, not even he, should have known. There were details from his childhood, places he'd visited, specific dates of significant events, and even his most personal interactions. It was like a timeline, mapping his every move, thought, and choice. Lucas tried to process it all, but the revelations were overwhelming. It was clear he was part of something planned, something that had involved him long before he'd started to notice. Among the files, he found a list of names, including Claire Fisher. There were also mentions of people he didn't know, but who were connected to him in ways he couldn't yet understand. As he went through the documents, a pattern started to emerge, suggesting these people had something in common. They had all been monitored, manipulated, and led to act according to a larger plan, even if they were unaware of what was truly at play. Claire was a central piece, and he now understood she knew far more than she'd revealed in their first meeting. As he tried to absorb all of this, another message arrived, this time as a text: "You now know enough to make choices. But remember, not everyone is on your side, and the lines between allies and enemies are thin. Use what you know, but proceed with caution." Lucas read and reread the words, feeling like a pawn on a board controlled by unseen hands. The Alpha device had given him valuable information, but it had also shown him the full extent of the control being exerted over him and over the other names on the list. He knew he needed to find Claire again, to confront her with the information and see how far she was willing to help him. He decided to contact her, sending a direct, urgent message, saying they needed to meet to discuss something extremely important. Minutes later, she replied, setting up a discreet location in a city park where they could talk without drawing attention. This meeting would be crucial, and Lucas felt that, at last, he would get answers to the questions that had been piling up. On his way to the meeting, he found himself analyzing everyone around him, every car passing by, as if each could be part of the scheme. Paranoia was inevitable, and he didn't know whom to trust anymore. Arriving at the park, he saw Claire waiting, and he noticed she, too, seemed tense, scanning the area as if she expected to be followed. Lucas approached her and, without wasting time, handed her the Alpha device, explaining everything he'd found. Claire's expression hardened, and he realized that she might know even more about what it all meant. Claire led him to a more secluded area of the park and began speaking in a low, urgent tone. "Lucas, what you've found is more serious than you realize. This device, and everything it reveals, is part of a control network that goes beyond common understanding. These people have a reach that extends beyond anything anyone could imagine. They manipulate lives, destinies, and they do it without anyone suspecting. What you found in the Alpha device is only the surface of what's at stake." As Claire explained, Lucas felt a mixture of fear and outrage. He was nothing more than a piece, an element in something larger, manipulated from the very beginning. But now, with Claire by his side, he knew he wasn't alone. What they had in their hands was the chance to expose it all, to end the control. Resolute, Lucas promised himself he would see this through to the end, no matter the cost. The game had become dangerous, but now he had a clear goal: to dismantle the network that controlled his life. Returning home after the meeting with Claire, Lucas felt the weight of the decision he had made. The revelation that he was part of a control network, where his life was manipulated like some experiment, filled him with a cold anger but also a renewed sense of purpose. He knew that, from this moment on, everything would change. He was no longer just a pawn, and now, with the information in hand, he was ready to confront the system. However, this also meant that he was in immediate danger. That night, he went over every detail in the Alpha device and the messages, searching for any hint of how he could confront those behind it. But as he reviewed the files, it became clear that time was his greatest enemy. there were mentions of an Exodus operation, scheduled for the next 48 hours, and while he didn't know exactly what this meant, the instructions made it clear it was a crucial event with catastrophic consequences for him and everyone involved in the control network. Lucas knew he had to act fast, and Claire was the only person he could trust to help him devise a plan. The next morning, he met Claire again. She had spent the night analyzing the Alpha device, confirming his suspicions. The Exodus operation was a final measure of control, a step the manipulators would take to erase any evidence of their interference in the lives of the people they monitored. Lucas and Claire understood that if the operation went ahead, not only would many lives be at risk, but theirs as well. The network didn't tolerate leaks, and Lucas was now a dangerous leak. The only way to prevent the worst was to confront those behind the operation and expose everything before it was too late. Together, they quickly devised a bold plan. They decided to strike at the heart of the system by breaking into one of the main control points Claire had identified in the Alpha device files. It was an abandoned building on the outskirts of the city, a seemingly innocuous place, but according to the data, it housed a complex infrastructure used for monitoring and data storage. Lucas and Claire knew it would be risky, but this was their only chance to find irrefutable proof and destabilize the control network. If they could get in and access the servers, they would have the key to dismantle the system once and for all. At dusk, they met in the parking lot of a nearby abandoned store. Claire, pale-faced and focused, checked the improvised equipment they had gathered: laptops, tools to disable cameras, and a device she called the Encryption Master, a program designed to crack into protected systems. Lucas was nervous, but adrenaline pumped through his veins, giving him a clarity he rarely felt. He knew this was a mission with no return, and failure meant falling entirely under the network's control. After confirming everything was set, Lucas and Claire moved toward the building, sticking to the shadows to avoid the security cameras. Reaching the building, they forced open a side door that, according to the blueprints Claire had obtained, led directly to the basement, where the servers were located. The tension was palpable, each step echoing in the silence of the deserted building. Descending a narrow staircase, they found the server room. It was dark, the glow of the server lights casting a faint illumination over the space. Claire quickly connected her laptop to one of the servers and initiated the Encryption Master. The screen filled with lines of rapidly moving code until finally, the system was breached. Lucas watched the screen anxiously. The volume of data was overwhelming, and he knew they needed something specific to prove the extent of the network's control. Each second that passed increased the risk of being discovered, but they pressed on, searching for any clue that would reveal who was behind it all. Then, one file caught Claire's attention: Elimination Protocol. Opening the file, they discovered disturbing details about the Exodus operation. It involved the systematic elimination of all monitored individuals, using methods designed to make the disappearances appear as accidents or suicides. The file listed names, schedules, and even the specific mechanisms of execution, displaying the network's brutality and precision. Lucas felt a wave of cold terror when he saw his own name on the list, with a date and time marked for the operation's conclusion. He and Claire had less than 24 hours to act before they were eliminated. Time was running out, and they knew they had to leave with the data and find a way to alert the authorities or the media. As they transferred the files, they heard a noise in the hallway. Tension spiked instantly, and Lucas realized they had been discovered. They quickly packed up, erased their traces, and ran for the emergency exit. But as they climbed the stairs, they saw two guards blocking the only way out, forcing them to retreat to the basement and find another way. The situation grew more desperate with each passing minute, the air in the basement feeling heavy, the space increasingly claustrophobic. They decided to try an improvised escape through the ventilation system, knowing it was risky. With some difficulty, they pried open the vent and squeezed into the narrow, dark tunnels. The heat and lack of air made the passage difficult, but Lucas and Claire's determination was stronger than any physical obstacle. After what felt like an eternity, they finally emerged through a side exit, slipping past the guards and running as far from the building as possible. Now, with the evidence in hand, Lucas and Claire were determined to expose it all, no matter the cost. Lucas and Claire rushed to the car, both of their hearts pounding, panic mixing with the faintest sense of relief at having escaped. The adrenaline was still surging as Lucas started the engine and sped down the empty streets, trying to get as far away from that building as possible. What they had managed to take from the system wasn't just proof, it was a complete map of the network's operations, containing the list of monitored individuals, control methods, and detailed information about each person trapped in the same cycle of manipulation Lucas had discovered. However, with the Exodus operation underway, they knew they had almost no time before they became the next targets. Claire was going through the files on the laptop, trying to figure out the best next step. "We have two options," she murmured, without looking up from the screen. "We can try to contact a trusted journalist, someone who can expose this publicly, or we can take it straight to the authorities. But we need to act fast." Lucas knew both options came with risks. If they went to the media, there was a chance the story would be buried before it ever gained traction. But trusting the authorities meant risking that the network, with its likely infiltration into various sectors, could shut down any attempt at a report. As they drove, Lucas felt the weight of the choice he had to make. He didn't trust anyone fully anymore, and the idea of handing something so sensitive over to strangers made him uneasy. He thought back over his choices up to that point, remembering every detail of the past days, every clue he'd followed, every shocking revelation that had led him to this moment. This was a crossroads, and the path he chose now would determine his future and the future of many others who, without realizing it, were under the invisible grip of the network. Finally, he made a decision. "Claire, let's expose this ourselves. We need a secure platform, a way to release everything quickly, before anyone has a chance to stop us. If we make this information public, they won't be able to cover it all up at once." Lucas's idea was risky, but Claire agreed, understanding the logic behind his plan. They needed a safe place, somewhere they could prepare the material and post it without interference. Claire knew of a place, an old shelter on the outskirts of the city, equipped with internet and security, where they could prepare to release the information in bulk. When they arrived at the shelter, a modest but adequately equipped space, Lucas and Claire began organizing the data. They sorted the files, categorizing the most sensitive information, including the list of monitored individuals and the details of the Exodus operation. Every line Lucas read fueled a growing indignation, a silent rage against the system that had been manipulating so many lives without anyone suspecting a thing. Hours passed as they assembled the dossier, double-checking that every detail would be clear and direct. They knew they only had one chance, and once the material was released, there would be no going back. With everything ready, the final step was to choose the platform and the exact moment for the release. Claire suggested they publish on multiple platforms simultaneously, making it almost impossible for the data to be removed before it caused an impact. Lucas agreed, and together they scheduled the release for the following hours. However, as they made the final preparations, an urgent notification appeared on the screen. It was a new message, with no sender. "You still have a chance to back out. The system is bigger than you. An exposure will result in irreversible losses for everyone involved. Think before you act." The veiled threat made Lucas and Claire exchange tense looks. The network knew their intentions, and the tone of the message was clear: back off or face the consequences. Claire hesitated, biting her lip as she considered the decision. "Lucas, we have to think carefully about the impact of this. If we expose the network, we're not just putting ourselves at risk, but everyone else too. We could be setting off a bomb that will ruin lives." Lucas understood the dilemma, but his resolve was firm. He knew that, now that he understood the truth, he could never turn back and pretend nothing was happening. "They're already destroying lives, Claire. They're just trying to scare us. If we back out now, it'll be like giving them permission to continue. We can't allow that. Lucas's conviction was contagious, and Claire reluctantly agreed. It was time to move forward, no matter the threats. They knew the risk was real, but both were prepared to face the consequences. The countdown was starting, and the release would go live in just a few minutes. As they waited, they heard a sound outside the shelter. Claire looked through the window and saw a suspicious vehicle parked a few yards away. They had been tracked down. Fear heightened, but determination kept them focused. They had prepared everything, and now all that remained was to wait for the release. They looked at the clock, which counted down exactly 10 seconds until the automatic send. 10 seconds that felt like an eternity, each one loaded with tension and anticipation. The countdown reached 0, and in an instant, the files were sent to the platforms simultaneously. Lucas and Claire watched the data stream out, following as the files appeared online, one after another, like pieces of a puzzle unveiled to the world. The impact would be immediate, and they knew there would be no turning back. The network was exposed, and with it, the control scheme that operated in the shadows. As the vehicle outside drove away, they realized they had won a battle.